Greetings, mortals. It is I, Remortis, coming at you with another guide for Vrising, bringing you some more builds, this time for brutal difficulty. And in that, I have 4 of them for you, centered around the mid-game. So a caveat before we begin. These builds are not the end-all be-all of builds. There's no one-size-fits-all for brutal mode, since each boss is different and has their own strengths and weaknesses. None of these builds will be able to defeat every single boss. You'll have to mix it up as you go along. And ultimately, you need to play what feels fun for you. Not what I say. These are just suggestions after all. And I mostly made these builds around the different gear sets you can find in Act 1 and Act 2, and kind of try to mold these builds to help really bring out some of those playstyles. And fear not, there shall be timestamps below to skip to whatever is relevant to you, whether it be the builds, the gear, or the builds in action versus various boss fights. Just don't mind my awful mechanics. And without further ado, let's just get right into it, shall we? So the first build I'm going to go over is really easy to accomplish and comes online very early in the game actually. The Undead Archer, that just uses the longbow and summons a ton of minions to distract your enemies. This works on plenty of the early game bosses, as well as plenty of those in Act 2 as well. This is the setup I have at the moment for it, meaning you'll have to get your unholy points as soon as possible. In order to do that, we'll need to kill Goreswine the Ravager as soon as possible. And unfortunately, on brutal difficulty, he is a little challenging in the early game. One wrong move and you will get chain exploded on and you will die. All that being said, you could potentially kite Goreswine into somebody else, such as Lydia over here, who will help you to melt him away. Of course, you can fight him legitimately by kiting him around for the most part and just not getting hit of any of his attacks. Same thing could be said about Lydia, who you will also need, as she is the one who unlocks the longbow for you. Unfortunately, you won't be able to really get any more of your undead powers until Act 2, since one of the later bosses in Act 1, Nicholas, gives you an unholy ultimate ability. Which is not terrible, but it's not really going to allow us to bust out too many unholy abilities. And then, however, luckily, in Act 2, we can fight Leandra fairly early after you get a bit of your gear. And you can actually comfortably fight her in brutal mode. She's not too much different from normal. And a key thing to keep in mind with her is to just attack the purple ghosts that she summons at you. They can be hit by any of your basic attacks from your weapon and they'll instantly perish. And that's pretty much the hardest part of the fight, honestly. And that will secure you another level 1 unholy point. And then if you manage to kill Krieg by avoiding his exploding skeletons, as long as you stay away from them and dodge his hook and his spin, you'll be able to unlock your second unholy spell. Alright, so now back to the build. When you first beat Goreswine, you're going to either want to pick up Corrupted Skull or Ward of the Damned. Corrupted Skull is my preferred choice, since it is an on-demand skeleton and you get 2 charges and you can shoot him from afar. However, on Brutal, you might actually consider Ward of the Damned first, since it is a defensive option and will always summon a skeleton if you get hit. And you'll probably be getting hit by a lot of things, sometimes intentionally. So really, as long as you eventually get both of these 2, you'll be set. And then as for your jump, you can use whatever dash you desire. I like to rush Krieg and get our Veil of Bones online as soon as possible, just because it's another dash that will automatically summon a skeleton should you hit something. And one thing I wanted to note, the other reason why I really enjoy getting Corrupted Skull, as one of the early jewels you could potentially find. Unfortunately, it's based on RNG if you can get it or not. With the jewel, it will send out 2 projectiles, and if each of them hit a target, they will each summon a skeleton. And that will just help you distract your enemies, allowing you to shoot for free. And in the following battle I'm going to showcase, it will be versus Tristan the Vampire Hunter, notoriously one of the more difficult fights, both on normal and on brutal. Now, as you can see, my mechanics aren't the best, but you get the idea of the build. It's really simple, straight and straightforward. Obviously, you can pick and choose what spells you want to utilize. In this one, I'm just going all out on the undead spells, except for my ultimate. I just really love Chaos Barrage. It's just so much fun to just finish people off with it. To gear your Unholy Archer, we'll be using the longbow, the strongest you can make, whether it's the regular longbow, the merciless, or an iron, etc., etc. For a backup weapon, I highly suggest the mace, as it offers an escape or gap closer with its Q. Its E, once you unlock the Iron Mace, has a useful knockback and stun. It is vital for some of the bosses that you need to interrupt, although I do think the longbow Q can interrupt some bosses as well. For armor sets, we can use the Shadewalker from Act 1 or the Dusk Watcher in Act 2. Each of these sets will grant you critical strike chance on each of their pieces, and the 2-set bonus grants you movement speed for both. And a fun fact here, you actually can wear 2 of each of these sets and both of those movement speeds will stack. However, the Dusk Watcher 4-piece set also gets critical hit damage. As for upgraded necklaces in Act 2, the Dawn Runner is an obvious choice for even more movement speed, and another method to potentially cause condemn and getting more minions. For blood, any blood works here, although I think Rogue works fantastic for lower cooldown reduction on your dash, for more automatic crits, should you land your shot anyways, and potentially causing exposed weakness, increasing your damage, which can be devastating in combination with a fully focused longbow E, which hits the target multiple times. Moving on to one of my personal favorite builds, which is essentially a mix of illusion and chaos spells, and focusing on spell power, spell leech, as well as spell cooldown resets to just overwhelm your opponents, whether it be PvP or on boss battles. Thanks to our abilities here, we are going to be using the Veil of Illusion. This is one of my favorite dodges in the game because you dash forward like any other dash, but you have a limited time that you can decide to press it again and you will teleport back to where you originally came from, which can cause some really great outplay effects with our slashers. It will also spawn an illusion of ourselves that shoots for a little bit of damage and applies weaken, and we also can get Phantasm from it as well. And Phantasm is the passive that will give us a chance to reset our cooldown for our main 2 abilities. Moving on to our main illusion ability that we're going to be using is the Spectral Wolf. The Spectral Wolf is a pretty nice attack. It does solid damage on the initial hit and will bounce up to 2 targets, and then also apply weaken and Phantasm, which is nice. However, you manage to get your hands on one of the jewels that enhance the Spectral Wolf, particularly with this second ability here called the Wolf. I don't know what it's called, but whatever the modification does, it makes it so when your wolf returns, after its bounce, you get healed for, I think the roll, yes, about 80 to 100% of your spell power, which is pretty nuts, honestly. Granted, your spell power isn't the biggest at this point. It's probably hovering around in the upper 20s, low 30s, so either way, it's still pretty good to get a chunk of like 20 to 30 health on just one hit. And then moving on to my other ability, Chaos Volley. Notoriously one of the stronger abilities throughout the Vrising during early access and some of the other updates. It got nerfed pretty hard, not dealing as much damage as it used to, but it's still a reliable ability. All it does is just shoots off 2 Chaos Bolts that each deal just a little bit over your spell power. Pretty good, and it also inflicts Ignite, which is a dot, dealing 50% damage over 5 seconds. Should you eliminate a target that has Ignite on it, it will explode, doing a little bit of AoE around it. So pretty good for help killing trash mobs or ads in a fight. And of course, I like using Chaos Barrage, which shoots out 4 giant Chaos Orbs, which is basically just a cracked up version of Chaos Volley. Really good ability, and I just love using it. It's just really satisfying. If you want to use this set in the early game, use the Warlock set, as that will give you Spell Leech and a little bit of spell power to help amplify your spells. And if you for the mid-game set, we'll be using the Dark Magic set, which increases your spell power, crit strike, and spell leech, which is all stats we want. As for what weapon to use with this build, it doesn't really matter for the most part at this point in the game, just because any of the weapons don't really affect your spell power or anything like that, beyond just your item level. However, there are plenty of good options to choose to help with crowd control, escaping, or just jumping around. I personally prefer using slashers here, or the pistols, or perhaps the scythe to help keep things away from you with its E. Similarly, you can use the mace to jump around and stun things as well. Eventually, once you get to your ancestral weapons, try to go for a slasher or really any weapon that would apply Unholy or Chaos. The reason you want to be able to apply Unholy, even though we're not really using Undead here, is because it'll inflict Condemned, and Condemned will just increase your damage by 15% on whatever your target is. And if you happen to kill them, you get a few extra distractions. Pretty sweet. And if you see here, I got a lucky roll for my slashers. That also gives me even more Spell Leech and Spell Critical Strike power. As for upgraded necklaces in Act 2, you'll either want the Pendant of the Sorcerer, or Spell Leech and a chance to cause Ignite, or the Warlock to gain more Spell Crit and a chance to inflict Chill. Both are fabulous choices, though I usually prefer to lean towards Spell Leech. However, I'm sure the Warlock can yield great results too. And for Blood, without a question, we're going to be wanting Scholar Blood here. For spell damage, Spell Leech, cooldown reduction, and even more chances to recast spells on top of our illusion magic. Moving on to our next set, I wanted to do something a little bit different and to utilize the Crimson Templar set just because it looks so fucking cool. Whether or not it is a good set, it doesn't matter because in my heart it is #1 just because of how cool it looks. And the idea I wanted to go for was something a little bit tanky that could also duke it out. However, being melee on brutal difficulty is quite the challenge since most of the bosses are very anti-melee. So what you're going to need is at least one type of counterattack, whether it be the simple counters like Blood Right, or you need a shield ability like Ward of the Damned, or Cold Snap, Discharge. Now, Discharge on this ability is fantastic against trash mobs and PvP, because if you block somebody, you suck them in towards you, you stun them, and then you shoot out a little lightning orb that can do get a bit of damage. Nothing super crazy. You can get some gems that enhance them and make the little orbs heal you a little bit, which is pretty nice. But more importantly, it makes it so you suck them in, and that way you can line them up with a nice attack, whether it be your mace or your greatsword. Personally, I wanted to use the greatsword here just because the greatsword's really fun to use. Your Q is like a dashing charge ability, and as you first use it, you are semi-invulnerable in terms of crowd control. You still take damage, it just doesn't affect you. And then if you land on it, you'll push the target back, whether it's a boss or if it's smaller minions, they will be stunned by it. And then your E is a jumping up attack, is an attack where you jump up in the air and dodge attacks while you're doing this, and then you slam back down. Timing it right, you could avoid some pretty nasty damage. So what I decided to use is our Unholy Jump, Blood Right, just because I had a gem that enhanced my next primary attack by 46%. It's okay. Honestly, it's probably a little bit better to use your Ward of the Damned, just because you can get a skeleton to distract them. But I also wanted to try to avoid using unholy spells if necessary. So really, you can just use whatever jump you want. And then as for your second ability, I wanted to really dive into the melee side of things, so I went with Power Surge, because it increases your movement speed, attack speed, and also causes Ignite on your attacks to help you deal a little bit of dot damage. More importantly, I really like Power Surge because of the movement speed. Obviously, the attack speed's really good too. And yeah, that's pretty much it. For the Crimson Knights, we are wanting to be swinging big hunks of metal. So our weapon choices are going to be either the Greatsword or the Mace. Both are fantastic. I love them both. You might even want to be using both for this build. The Greatsword has a charge ability on its Q that will knock up non-boss enemies and do pretty good damage. When you initially charge, you ignore crowd control from most sources. Its E jumps up and slams the ground, and while you're airborne, you dodge everything, so a well-timed E can save your life or even avoid damage. For a ranged option, you might consider the pistols or the whip, or the longbow, or whatever you damn well please. We'll be using the full set of the Crimson Templar here, even though its 4 set bonus isn't great as it just increases your health. But let's be honest, we're just using this because it looks fucking badass. Each piece increases our attack speed, and the 2 set will give us Leech on our weapon strikes. For necklaces, we're either going to want the Dawn Runner, the Knight, or the Dusk Watcher. For either more movement attack speed or a little bit of Leech. Really, whatever you can find first will suffice just fine. Not a big deal, you don't need to go hunting down for a specific necklace. Even the spellcasting necklaces will work here as well. As for what kind of blood the Crimson Knight desires, they either want to use Warrior or Brute. Especially the higher the warrior, the better, as you'll be able to get parry, which just significantly reduces the damage you're going to be taking overall. And then Brute is just really nice for really any build, because it increases your gear score, which might help you just edge out a little bit to beat that boss or meet that boss and not be getting your face slammed everywhere, just because you're finally on their equal footing. But then there's also tons of leech and all the goodies that come with that. And lastly, we have on this list another rogue type set, mostly utilizing the Veil of Illusion with slashers, again, because I just love that combo. I do kind of use a mix of the Spellcaster and the Knight, since I'm using the Spectral Wolf, just because it's such a good ability and for that heal. And then Power Surge to help dart around a little bit better and to be a little bit of a ninja. And as for the ultimate, I decided to use Heart Strike to help kind of do some cool kills here. I do Heart Strike, and I just run in to do my Slasher Q to just make them all explode. Pretty sweet. And here I didn't get to really showcase this build too much. You'll probably see a lot more of that coming from me in a future video, as I'll probably be using this kind of set in the very near future, especially if doing some Bright Haven PvP. For the Illusion Assassin, we'll be using slashers for the most part, with pistols as your backup. And we'll be using the same Duskwatcher armor that the Archer build uses. And honestly, you could combine the two builds together, since they both enjoy Rogue Blood for more crits and all those kind of shenanigans. And that's all the builds I have for you today. I hope you guys like them, and more importantly, I hope that they help you with your climb through Brutal. Please like, comment, and subscribe for more guides like this. And I hope to see you in the next video. Farewell for now.